We're live. Welcome to Chad Klamen of the Klamen Group. This is Mike Swale, and we're back for episode 4 of our real estate investment seminar. And this is we're doing once a month, and this is the fourth straight month that we're doing this. And I'm sticking with it because I can see the views that these are getting. And I know not everybody is always able to join us live. If you are live, please do ask questions. Please do join the conversation. Feel free. I'll kind of watch the chat here. But I've invited Chad on to talk today about building our portfolio over time and taking that long-term approach. And Chad, why don't you just take a second, give us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I appreciate you introducing me. So let's see, when I graduated, I moved to St. Louis and I was working like in corporate America. And my dad had always been in real estate because, you know, I work for him now and family business. And it didn't necessarily work out. And I did some traveling and I came back and I was like, all right, Dad, time for me to, you know, come to the family business. And he's like, Chad, you know, you have no experience, you know, you just traveled, like, you know, no, I'm not hiring you, you know, go out there and you know, and learn the business a little bit. And
I respect that. I like that approach.
Yeah. No, it ended up working out. I'm really happy that happened because it gave me a different perspective. And, you know, I was like, well, who am I going to go work for? So then I just started basically cold calling like the most experienced guys in St. Louis in real estate. So I called Michael Steinberg, who at the time, or is one of the top shopping center developers, you know, probably in the country for sure in St. Louis. And he's like, oh, come out to my office, you know? And I was like, really? Just okay. Went to his office and he's, you know, really helpful. He's like, all right, well, you need a mentor and, you know, I'm too old to train you. So, you know, I'm going to call this guy. And he sent me out to go work for Gary Gruey, who's a shopping center developer. And I worked for him for a couple of years. And it was pretty much invaluable experience because, you know, he owns a private jet and he flies around to his different centers. And so like I learned from, you know, like I felt like it was like the Harvard School of Real Estate. And then when I realized I was going to go work for my dad still, I got into like the residential business and went to work for Keller Williams for about a year. And then I've been with my dad now since 2000, like the end of 2016. So,
okay.
And yeah, now we're still going strong and trying to grow and still getting after it.
Real quick, before we dive in, what's one thing that's better and one thing that's worse about working with your dad versus working with some other expert in the industry?
Well, I think like the reality is business can be complicated and family can be complicated. So when you add the two, like, you know, it could become tricky because it doesn't matter what happens. Like I'm always his son. And so like, he's always going to look at me as sort of his son. Right. But I guess the benefit to that is he's still always going to look at me as a son. And so it doesn't matter whether we're bumping heads or whatever, like, you know, I know he still loves me and he's still my dad. And so I think that's like, you know, two sides of the same coin. And sure. It creates, I think, innate and, you know, naturally, you know, more complexity, but at the same time, you know, I still know that, you know, he cares about me and he's still.
It's got to be a little bit more alignment though, too, because you never have to question if you have each other's best interests at heart, right? With like a business partner, usually you don't have to question, but you know, family's family.
Yeah, no doubt about it. As a saying, it was a saying, the only ships that don't sail are partnerships. Which I don't know if I believe that or not. I don't believe that, but you know, when it's your family and everything like that, you don't have to worry about, you definitely don't have to worry about, you know, unaligned interests.
So with the first 3 episodes here, we've done a couple things. We've looked at what's available in the St. Louis market in episode 1. In episode 2, we looked at a different market in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, just to get an idea of how that compares to the rental market. And then last time with Craig Smith, we looked at properties that are ready to go and what the ROI might be versus properties that need a little bit of kind of wholesale rehab type stuff in order to get live and what that ROI might be. Today, I want to kind of juxtapose the short term versus the long term. And you are a long-term real estate investor and you have grown a portfolio of rentals. And how many doors are you guys up to now?
So like half the stuff I own is with my dad, and then half the stuff is either with a partner on my own, and we're up to like 100 or so doors, like 98 doors.
Okay. So I'm kind of the same way.
Yeah, so it's a combination of like some are single family houses and then some are duplexes and then some are, you know, 4 families or whatever.
So I'm kind of structured the same way. My wife and I have a small real estate portfolio, and then my business partner and I have a separate small real estate portfolio. And between the two of them, we're at about 12 doors. So you guys are ahead of us in terms of accumulating these properties. You know, we started probably about 5 years ago in earnest. So you guys have a little bit more time in than we do as well. So how does your approach differ in your 100th purchase and 101st purchase versus what you might have been looking for with your first 10?
I think that's a good question. When I first started, I sort of wanted to get in the door, and I was more concerned about like the cost and the barrier of entry versus the rent. And I was really looking for like a big difference between, what I'm getting in it for and the rent that I was going to get from that property. In the sense that like maybe I would be buying in a market that probably isn't as long-term as strong as today. I'm very concerned about, do I want to own this property or this asset, not just today, but hopefully in 20 or 30 or 40 years, like with the intent of, just keeping it forever, where previously we might end up keeping them forever, but I wasn't as concerned as like the strength of the market in 20 years as like just sort of getting my foot in the door and hopefully being able to collect rent.
So let me see if I can sum that up and you tell me if I'm on the right track. So on day one, you were really hyper focused on return on cash, right? How much am I going to put out versus what I'm going to put in? Now it sounds like you care a lot more about the quality of the asset because you're going to have to deal with it over the long term. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And part of it is like, when I first started, you don't have as much money, and like I had my dad as a partner, but it never was like, oh, he's just going to flip the bill. It was like, well, no, if we're doing this.
It sounds like he made you earn it.
Yeah, I was like, you're putting in half, and so we weren't going out and buying, the what I would call an A-class property because I didn't have any, didn't have any money. It was just starting. Sure. So, and even when I was working for like the shopping center developer and the Keller Williams, like it takes a long time to start making money in this business. And so it was just sort of like, okay, well, what can we buy at a discount that when we go to refinance, we can not use or use very limited cash.
That's awesome. One of the things that I've been arguing on this series, I've sort of just come to this realization over the last year, thanks to some of the investment software that we have now, and we can analyze a property over the long term better. I've been arguing that in my career, I've been too hyper focused on initial cash flow. What is going to be out of my pocket on day one, and immediately out of the gate, how much is it going to cash flow? One of the things that's changed about the real estate environment over the last 10 years, and specifically we're talking about the St. Louis market, which can differ from some other markets, is I feel like you used to, when I bought my first couple rental properties, I could go and I can get, with a $25,000 to $30,000 down payment, I can go and get $500 a month in clean cash flow. And I feel like that doesn't exist as readily today as it did back then. And it can kind of trip me up, because when I'm looking at a property that may only cash flow $50 a month, but I've got to put 20, 30,000 into it, I feel like that stops me a lot of the time. So first question is, do you kind of see that too? Has your ability to just buy a MLS listed property and have it cash flow on day one, is that less opportunity today? And how much do you care about that?
Well, there's no doubt about it. Like pre-COVID, you could buy what I would call like a baked cake, where it was pretty much ready to operate, and maybe you had a little bit of work to do to raise rents and maybe turn over some tenants or whatever, but it was definitely easier to get in at market value or close to market value and still make the numbers make sense. In today's world, because inventory and prices are going up, and now as interest rates rise, it's a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
When I started, because of who I previously worked for, his idea and what he kind of baked in my mind was like, pay down debt as fast as you can, and then one day you wake up and you own the property for free and clear. And your biggest expense is always debt service. And so when I first started, like when we were buying some of the stuff that was on the lower end, like that, we were putting on like as low short is amortizing debt as possible, and trying to pay it off as quickly as possible. And like
you didn't care about cash flow, you cared about getting it paid off.
I didn't care about cash flow at all. I didn't even think about it. I cared about like net worth and paying down debt, which I think that there's probably a hybrid to like the way I was thinking about it. Now I think about debt a little bit differently, and I'm a lot more comfortable with it. It was just kind of where I was, and kind of where I learned is like, okay, let's just pay it down as quickly as possible. And then I wasn't living off any of the cash flow. I was doing like, flip deals or, traditional agency stuff, to pay the bills. And like the goal of the rentals was like, okay, well, it's 10 years is going to go by, and I'm, hopefully still going to be here. And so like, what am I trying to accomplish in 10 years? And wasn't necessarily focused on like tomorrow and getting cash flow.
Yeah, and I feel like I was the exact opposite. I didn't necessarily care about ever paying off the property. I was going to gain equity by appreciation, but I wanted the cash flow because I was kind of focused on that FIRE movement, right? Of having my passive cash flow exceed my monthly obligations so that I could work less. Although as I look, 10 years later, I'm not working any less, that's for sure. So it's interesting that you looked at it from like the completely opposite angle. So what do you feel like that middle ground is? What's your current, how do you look at it now?
I look at it now where like every single door is in addition to like the current cash flow that we have, and that I'm okay with stretching out payments longer, knowing that, to your point, over time, the tenant's going to pay down the debt. Hopefully it's going to appreciate. Hopefully we get rental growth. What I'm gotten much better at from an operations standpoint is focusing on growing the revenue. So like previously, like if we bought a house and we put a tenant in there, we'd shove put a tenant in there and like not think about raising rents. We wouldn't, just operationally, we weren't as strong as we are today, where now I'm like, okay, let's put them in there. Let's get as good of debt terms as possible. And then let's focus from an operation standpoint of raising that gap between cash flow and, or revenue and debt service and expense.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point because again, I have been so mistakenly focused on initial cash flow, and I never even used the word initial cash flow before like the last 12 months. But the cash flow isn't a static figure. Your loan, depending on your terms, if you're able to come in at a 30-year fix, for example, your loan won't go up, but your rents can, and so that cash flow can actually grow over time. And I think that's a variable that people do not take into account often enough.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, and hindsight's always 20/20, but that 30-year fixed rate that we could get 2 years ago at 4% or, or 3.5% for an investment property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's probably gone. I just always thought, oh yeah, maybe rates will go up to 4.5. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
now, and I knew in the back of my mind, okay, that could change, but it wasn't right in front of my face. Now it's right in front of my face. I'm like, that 30-year fixed rate looks really good right now. Yeah. And I could have had I thought ahead, I was like, okay, well, I could have put that on fixed terms and reduce my interest rate risk. And if I want to pay down that quicker, I always can, where I was sort of like, okay, well, we'll get a commercial loan and it'll renew in 5 years or whatever, but let's just pay down debt as quickly as possible to reduce the risk that way. And maybe that's as efficient as possible. That's
another thing I find myself repeating a lot. You can always take cash and use it to pay down a loan. You can't always count on being able to increase your loan to replenish your cash, right? It's nice when you can, but you can't count on it. But the one thing you can count on is if you have the cash, you can always use it to pay down debt. I think a lot of people have that struggle. Hey, I have a little bit of cash. Do I use it to pay down debt or do I use it to go and acquire a new asset? And what would your answer to that be? Is it depends, or is it always acquire the asset?
Say that question one more time.
So let's say you have a chunk of cash and you're trying to decide what to do with it. And your options are use it to pay down some of the debt that I have and reduce my debt service, to your earlier point, or do I take this pile of cash and use it to acquire a new asset and not worry about the debt service or the debt reduction?
I think it depends on what your terms are on your debt. I think it depends on kind of where you are in your investing career. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, I might have been like, yeah, let's just pay down some more debt. Today, I'd probably be like, okay, well, we could probably use that cash more efficiently. And I think it comes from just being a little bit more comfortable with debt and, just understanding, how you can get a return a little bit better by not being as conservative.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Is there a number? Is there a statistic that you use more often than not to evaluate whether to add something to your portfolio? Are you using ROI? Are you using cap rate? What's your go-to?
So I want it to be, like within 20 to 25 minutes of our office and no farther. So we're in U City, so we're pretty centrally located. So like from a starting standpoint, so I can give you an idea about our business. We'll buy probably 60 houses this year, 65 houses. 1/3 will wholesale. So we won't really do a whole lot to it. We'll just resell it. Probably 1/3, we'll clean up, fix up and resell. And then maybe another third we'll keep. So like if it's past 25 minutes from our office, we're just not even going to keep it because like it becomes it's hard. You can't drive by it. It's just, it's not ideal from a management standpoint. And then from like a numerical standpoint, we're really looking for like a stabilized 9.5 cap. And the way we calculate that is, and we can go over the exact numbers on how we calculate it, but it's pretty straightforward from like an expense standpoint. we don't do it like on a house per house basis because I know over our portfolio what it costs for us to operate. So we take a vacancy loss, we take a management loss, and then we take a standardized expense ratio or standardized expense number. I'm sorry, it's not a ratio.
That makes sense.
And what I've learned is that that number, whether I'm getting $1,800 a month in rent or $1,000 or $800 a month in rent, that expense pretty much maintains about the same. And so what I've learned probably more importantly than anything is that I do much better on properties that have larger top line numbers coming in because my expenses end up being about the same. And
so more revenue, same expense.
I would much rather own a 4-family that have 3-bed, 1.5 bath units than a 4-family with 1-bedroom units. Or I'd much rather own a house with 3-bed, 2-bath than a house with 2-bed, 1-bath. Because what I found is that to operate it ends up being closer than I initially would have thought.
The difference in cost is not significant, but the difference in revenue is significant.
That's right. That's right. And every dollar, so if I get a 3% increase on that $1,800, every dollar is straight profit.
Yeah.
Because my expenses, besides my taxes, are probably staying pretty close to the same. So it's profit. Where if I have $800 a month in rent and I have a water heater go out, that's the whole month is gone. Where if I have $1,800 a month in rent and a water heater goes out, it's still okay.
Yeah. The water heater is not double the cost for the.
That's right. The water heater is the exact same cost.
Yeah.
To paint.
That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah. To switch out an HVAC, to switch out a roof. I mean, the roof might be a little bit bigger, but it's not substantial, right? To make a repair to tuck pointing, it's all the same. Everything costs the same. Maybe to paint, it's more expensive, but besides that, everything's the same.
There's one thing that you're saying, but you're not saying, that I think is really important for people to hear if you're trying to do this for the long term. It's that expenses like water heaters, roofs, HVAC, they're not an if, they're a when. And so you have to account for them. The more assets you accumulate, you're talking about it as if it's just a normal part of your operating cost. And a lot of people are scared to invest because they're scared of costs like that. So what would you tell people who are worried about what if the HVAC goes out? What if the water heater goes out? Stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why you have reserves, so you have to have reserves, and that's part of the business. And the more properties you have, the more reserves you need to have, because it's like you're saying, it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Yeah. You just have to account for it. Don't be scared of it. Just account for it. Right.
Yeah. Just factor it into your equation. So when you're figuring out, whatever return you want, it's just an expense. And whether that expense, whether you're spending, we had to spend $5,000 to replace a sewer lateral line late last year. And so that only hit one property, but because when I bought it, I factored in that future most likely expense, and it hits every property in a way because we'll pull the averages of our expenses on the year. And that's our new number when we're going in and buying a property is, okay, well, what's the average amount it costs to operate this thing?
So when you have as many units as you guys have, it's sort of a zoomed out view where you're not too high or too low on any one house.
That's how we look at it.
Okay. I like that. Let's look at a live example here. So you were able to send me an active listing. This one is 1 day on the market. So let's take a look at it and kind of walk me through. This is 7409 Lynn Avenue. What do you like? What caught your eye about this one?
Well, it's in U City, so it's in my backyard. I like U City. I like that. Like if you were getting into the business, like if you look at that kitchen, it's not ideal, but those cabinets aren't bad. You could take that backsplash and get it glazed. So you get somebody, it's basically like tile paint.
Sure.
And you turn it white and put in some stainless steel appliances. And then all of a sudden now you got, a pretty cute kitchen.
Yeah.
So to get into this.
That yellow is throwing me off, but you're right.
Yeah. So they can glaze it and they paint it's like tile paint. They turn it white is what we would do. And then I would assume, I haven't been in this house, that kitchen, if you go back, the floor, it's got like that linoleum on top. I would bet that I don't know for sure, but I would guess there could be hardwood floors underneath there.
Usually,
so you rip that stuff up, you sand and stain the hardwood floors, and all of a sudden you paint it, you change out that yellow, and you've got, almost a move-in ready house.
So when you look at this one, and I'm just kind of thumbing through the pictures now, the kitchen clearly needs something. You might argue that you want to reglaze the tile in here. You might not.
Right. That's right.
Okay. The tub's cute. That old mid-century mint green. What do you see when you look at the basement?
So I'm looking for foundation issues is mainly what I'm concerned about. I also am concerned about water because U-City got nailed with some water issues. And so I just want to make sure that, they didn't experience 5 feet of water in this basement, because if they did, I can't imagine weather is going to start getting better. It seems like it's getting worse every year.
Hard to say, but it looks like there might be some moisture down here. And of course, it's just pictures. It's really hard to tell, but
It's hard to tell. And like a little bit of water is not a big deal. It's like, and there's a dehumidifier. So they're for sure getting some water.
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
I mean, that electric panel is going to go.
Yeah. You find that a lot though, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So call it $3,000 for the electric panel.
They have a humidifier, huh?
Yeah.
Whole house humidifier. Is that a dehumidifier or is that a humidifier?
I think it's a humidifier.
Yeah, I think so too.
For the.
Ooh, we still have an iron stack. So we
got to go. And usually when you see that probably means that the sewer lateral line, unless it's been replaced, is going to have a problem too. You don't know that for sure, but it's kind of like that's the sewer lateral line above ground. And if the sewer lateral line looks like that, you got a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going in budgeting, reglazing, new appliances, probably some paint, and then some sewer work here and an electrical panel. What are you tallying all that up? What are you budgeting for this project?
Can you start from the beginning and we can just go through it picture by picture?
Let's do it. Yeah. Exterior looks clean, right? Front.
Yeah, it does. I mean, landscaping, call it $1,000 from the front. It's hard to tell. So you're gonna have to sand the floors, which is gonna be like $3 a square foot. It's 1,000 square feet. So call it another $3,000 for sanding and staining. Maybe call it 3,500 because of stain, because those look like they've got some urine stains on there.
Okay, and then we got paint.
So we're at 5.
Okay.
The kitchen, I would change out those countertops and I would put in stainless steel appliances. So call it $1,000 for the countertops. So you're at 6 for the appliances. You're at 7, 8. The floors would get ripped up and hopefully there's hardwood underneath there. And then probably change out the knobs and pulls. So figure you're at 8.5 right now.
Okay. Leaving the kitchen, going to the hallway doesn't tell us much. The bedrooms, probably not a whole lot needed in there, right?
Not a whole lot. What we always do is we change out all the light fixtures. So we change out the light fixtures, change out the outlets and the cover plates and all that stuff. So everything's white. It just looks better. So figure we were at 8.5. I would just glaze this. And a lot of people don't like it because it starts chipping. The glazer I have is pretty good and we haven't had a ton of issues. So we would just glaze the whole bathroom and probably cost me $1,500. So if we were at 8, the bathroom, figure we're at 10. And then you're going to have to paint the whole basement. I'm assuming there's no foundation problems. So, you got to paint the house in the basement. We're at 12. You got electric. We're at 15. You got the sewer stack. It's another $1,500. So you're at 16.5. And then figure there's some sewer lateral issues, 16.5 plus another 3. You're at 19.5. But U-City has a program, so you might be salvageable like that. And then besides that, you're power washing the outside and, call it $22,000 maybe.
Okay. Yeah, let's say it's about 20 grand for, use round numbers because we got a lot of estimating in here. So it's listed for 129.9 and it's only been on the market for 1 day, but clearly it needs work. So what are you thinking you're probably able to get this property for? And we can start kind of filling out some of this information and get a long-term analysis.
It's hard to predict. There's one that's pending down the street and it's really nice, really nice. I actually, it's under, which shocked me, but it's under contract for $280 a square foot on Wayne, which is nuts. So, I don't know if I buy that this thing's going to be worth $280,000, but figure somebody underwrites it at, I don't know, figure somebody underwrites it at 250. If they were to think it's worth 250 times it by 0.8 minus, 75 would bring us to 125. I don't know. It seems about right. I think it seems priced about right. I have no idea what it would take to get it done, but it seems within the ballpark.
All right, let's say you get it done at 135, right at purchase price, 135, right? A little bit over ask.
Sure.
All right, and we're going to make some assumptions here. What do you think once you've put your 20 grand into it? What do you think you're going to be able to rent this thing for?
I believe you could get about 1,400. If you hop on rentometer.com, I've found them to be very accurate. So let's test my guess.
I might have used all of my free.
You've used it too?
I've used it a few times. But let's assume you're right there, about 1,400. You've done a lot of these. So again, one of the things to get away from initial cash flow, which actually the initial cash flow on this one might end up being pretty good. Don't look at it yet, but initial cash flow versus long-term cash flow. The national average rent renewal rate right now is 8% increase. St. Louis doesn't usually follow the national that closely. Let's say we get 5% rent increases. Average annual vacancy. What is your average vacancy across your portfolio?
5%.
5%. All right, so let's do 4%. Basically, you turn it over 1 month every 2 years, right?
Sure.
This should be the actual taxes. I input this earlier, but we have initial renovation of, let's say, $22,000, you said. And then realtor fees when you sell it of $6,000. Loan amount, we're putting 20% down, let's say, for example. And you're going to have closing costs, and we're going to look at this over the 10-year time period. So what this tells us is that initial monthly cash flow is actually really good at roughly $300 a month. Cumulative over 10 years, though, because you're counting on some increases here, your return on cash ends up piling up pretty well at 23%. Cumulative cash on cash return 150% over 10 years. Appreciation gain with a very conservative annual forecasted appreciation of 3.6 means in 10 years, this $135,000 property is going to be worth 193. I think you and me would both argue that it's going to be worth a lot more than 193, and that as soon as you're done rehabbing it, it's probably pretty close to that already, right?
Yeah, I mean, based on what we're doing, it maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
But let's be super, super conservative here and say that it's only
worth that type of money. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a $60,000 gain. The net of what you, these numbers are going to be net of what you spend. Amortization gain, that small loan has been paid down over the course of 10 years. And so when you start adding all this stuff up, and this is kind of what I mean by not getting too hyper focused on initial cash flow, even though initial cash flow on this property for the price is pretty decent, your gross revenue is $260,000 minus the expenses. And again, I know you look at expenses a little bit differently, but here you made $135,000 profit off of a $49,000 initial investment, which is compounding to 277% over the 10 years, which is 14% compounded per year. And so you make money in at least 3 ways here with your cash flow, your amortization, and your appreciation. And one thing this does not include, because it's so personal for everybody, is the depreciation return on your taxes, of course, right? And obviously hard to quantify because everybody's taxes are different, but that's like an added bonus on top of a $135,000 profit, which is basically what you bought the house for. 10 years later, that's how much you've made in profit, not counting what you're saving on your taxes. So based off of this looks like a pretty good buy to me.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty good buy to me too. I mean,
I'll stop my share now. How would you evaluate that? Now, this is kind of a really detailed look at things. How would you look at it?
Yeah, so I'm not a spreadsheet guy.
Okay.
So let me do this. Can you see my screen?
I can, yeah.
Okay. So what I would probably do is I'd take $1,400 a month, and we run at about a 5% vacancy. So I would times it by 0.95, and I'm doing it on my phone here. So 1,400 times 0.95. So after vacancy loss, I'm keeping 1,330. And then I would times it by 0.994 because we own a property management company, but like we pay the property management, so it can operate. Okay. And so we would times it, and we charge ourselves 6%. So we would charge ourselves 6%. So I would times that 1,330 by 0.94, which brings me to $1,250 a month. And then I would multiply that. So that's my revenue per month. And I'd multiply that by 12. Times 12 brings
150,
about $15,000 in top line revenue per year. And then on average, our houses cost us per year $3,500. And so every house is a little bit different. Some might cost us $4,000. Some of the taxes on another house might be cheaper. It might only cost us $3,000. I might have the sewer lateral that bust in one house that cost us $10,000 to operate that year, but I had no other sewer lateral issues everywhere else. So on average last year, it cost us about $3,500 to operate a house after I back out all the other expenses outside of vacancy and management. So I would take,
This is a big difference between the long-term accumulation view versus somebody who's looking at 4 or 5 properties. They don't have that data set. They don't have that portfolio to spread the cost across.
Right. And what I'm looking at, okay, does this make sense today? If it makes sense today, based on your model you just showed us, I'm assuming it's going to make sense in the long term. And then that goes back to buying in good areas. Like, am I happy with this spot today? Do you think I'll be happy with it in 20 years? Great. Now let's fast forward, or let's back up from the 20-year time horizon. Let's back up. Can I make sense of it today? If I can, then it's probably a deal worth doing.
All right.
And
So you're at a net here of 11.5.
So I do that, the 15 minus 3,500 brings me to 11.5. And the way I'm looking at it is I want a cap rate of about 9%, 9.5%. As interest rates go up, I want that spread to grow. So like we're looking at least at, a 1.5 spread, ideally 2 or 3 point spread between what my cap rate is and what my interest rate is.
Yeah,
so if I'm borrowing money at 6%, I want, at least a 9 cap. Ideally, I get a 9 cap. In order to get the cap rate, I would divide this.
This one's going to be close. I don't think it'll be quite 9.
I don't think it is either, but divided by, what do we say, $130,000. Oh, plus our cost. So it's 150 grand.
It's going to be like a 7 cap.
It's a 7.5 cap.
Okay.
0.76. So is this for me? It's probably not a deal for me.
Okay.
But if I do this every day and we're looking at property every single day, and so I probably wouldn't buy this one, but I'd look at it and it's close. And if I was in a job where I didn't look at real estate every day and I'm comparing, okay, do I want to put my money here? Or do I want to put my money in the stock market? Like, it's hard to find a 7.5 cap in today's market. And if you were going to look at a multifamily property in St. Louis, I can promise you, if it's stabilized, you're not looking at a 7.5 cap. That's just not what people are buying stuff at. So for this particular house, like, I don't think it's a horrible buy. It's probably not something that we would jump on, but it's also not, it's not horrible. It's not out of the question.
Yeah, I think the question becomes, and I'm going to steal the share real quick, is because, okay, with the cash flow and the long-term appreciation numbers, we said, why wouldn't you buy this one? Well, you have a very disciplined answer of, well, because I'm looking for a 9 to 9.5 cap and it's only a 7.5 cap. So it doesn't fit my portfolio. And you guys have been disciplined in building this portfolio. And somebody might ask, well, man, this is for me. And I think that if you have the investment ready and you don't have anything better to do with $49,000, right? Because you're not coming in here with no cash. You're having to give up the cash for the down payment and your renovation cost, right?
Right.
And if you finance that, it's going to eat up your cash flow, so you won't have any. And that's kind of where that spread on cost of funds versus cap rate comes into play, because you're not really gaining anything on your cost of funds if you're paying 7.5% and gaining 7.5%, right? Yeah. So I think that's where staying disciplined is concerned. But if I had unlimited cash, then maybe it's a different story.
And,
right?
And the reality is, a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now is a larger renovation than that. Mm-hmm. And so if the renovation's larger, you're going to want a better return. And so that's a pretty stabilized asset. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's close. And so depending on what type of business you're in, I mean, I'm in the real estate business. I'm dealing with contractors every single day. And so I'm okay taking on a bigger rehab, and I want to be compensated for that. But if I wasn't in the real estate business, and I was looking at my first or my fifth deal, I probably would want something where, okay, I'm not going to miss my mark on my budget by $30,000.
Lower job, lower risk in the rehab.
Yeah, right. And even if you miss by 10% on $22,000, isn't going to kill you.
Let me ask one more question, if you don't mind pulling your Word document back up. So there's always the question, well, it's listed for 129 and it's on day one, so we're going to assume it's going to go this weekend, but knowing how much work it needs, it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. So the next question becomes, all right, Chad, if this sits through this weekend and next weekend, what would you have to go back and make an offer for it to fit your model? So what's that 11.5 divided by 9%? About 100 grand?
$127.
Okay. So at 135, it's a no. But if it sits here and you can go back and get it at 125.
Well, we got to figure it's still going to cost me $20,000 to get it there. So, if I could buy it at 105,
okay,
it's probably a deal worth doing.
All right. That's good, man. That was very, very valuable information. Thanks for walking through all that. We went a little bit longer, but I think the information was so good. I think it was worth it. So thanks for kind of walking us through that. Is there anything that you didn't get to say that you think is important for people to know when you're looking at the long-term view of investing?
I mean, I would say that in 10 years, you're going to wake up, and I have had friends and people tell me that they were planning on investing since I got in the real estate business, whether I was going to help them find an investment or whatever. And, had they done that and captured some of this post-COVID appreciation, they'd probably be thrilled. And now they're probably like, dang, it's too late, but we're probably going to look back at this time in maybe not 10 years, but in 15 years and say, dang, everything looks so cheap, or whatever. And so I would just say, the second one's a lot easier than the first, and the third one's a lot easier than the second. And so, even if that means you're getting a partner and saying, hey, I'm just going to reduce my risk because I'm nervous, and I'm going to go get a buddy or two, and we're going to buy our first house together, it'll get you off the bench and into the game. And it might only, instead of costing you $49,000 divided by 3, and it costs you 15, and now you're in the game and you get used to it, and you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Maybe the next time you do it with one buddy, and then the third time you're like, okay, I can do this on my own. I feel good about it.
Man, I am so glad you said that. You've heard the saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now, right?
Right.
I'm going to go off on that tangent. I'm really glad that you brought that up. And we didn't talk about this before, but I want to kind of rant on that for a little bit. So one thing that we did talk about earlier in the conversation is that, I kind of mentioned, man, I used to be able to go into Fenton, an area that I'm familiar with. My son lives there. We own a couple of rental properties there. 2015, 2016, 2017, I can go to Fenton. I could spend $150,000 on a ready-made, what you call it, a baked cake.
A baked cake.
I can go buy a baked cake for $150,000, and I would clear $500 a month in cash flow, $6,000 a year, and off of a $30,000 20% down payment, I could get $6,000 back every year, and it was just clean and consistent. I can't do that now with a baked cake on the market, right? Well, why? What happened? So if you step all the way back to the crash 2008 through 2013, we are now 10 years removed from the bottom. The bottom was really 11, 12, 13, right? The start of the bottom was 08, but it didn't really hit a bottom until 2013, especially in the St. Louis market. Well, between 2008 and 2015, nobody, and I mean almost nobody, was building new houses in St. Louis, right? So meanwhile, the population continued to grow, and first-time home buyers started getting pent up in the market. Nobody was building new inventory. And so we had a huge demand increase versus no new supply. And in fact, houses are aging out, right, and becoming uninhabitable. So really supply was decreasing over that time. Demand was increasing, and it created an environment in St. Louis where homes have appreciated a lot in the last 5 years, especially in the last 3 since COVID, which you brought up. So the question is, okay, now that that's happened, what happens over the next 10 years? Like you said, does that mean I missed the boat, or did the boat come in for harbor over the last 6 months and now I need to jump on it while I can?
Yeah.
I have my take on it, but what's your take?
So this is interesting. The average first-time home buyer is 31 years old.
Okay.
There have been more people that there's going to be more people that turn 31 this year than last year.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more people that turned 31 last year than the year before. So what that tells me is like this entry level, good rental property / first-time home buyer property. There's more people that are moving into that first-time home buying age than there even are right now. So from an inventory standpoint, it seems almost impossible for the inventory imbalance to become more balanced, because construction prices are very high. And unless they come way down and people stop buying houses for some crazy reason, it seems impossible for that imbalance to happen.
All right. So let me ask you this. The average first-time home buyer age range, it changes every year. It's usually between 31 and 35.
Yeah,
right?
you would know better than me.
Yeah. No, but you're right. Between 30 and 35, 31 is a good number. So if the average first-time home buyer age is 31 or 32 or whatever, it doesn't really matter, right? There are more, you're absolutely right. From a demographic standpoint, more first-time home buyers are being created because people are hitting their 30s now. So what is the average first-time home buyer price in St. Louis? And I know we don't have the statistic in front of us, but just from your own experience, would you say 200, 250? What would you say?
Yeah, right in that range.
So my argument would be, for anybody sitting here wondering if they've missed the boat on investment, tell me what happens when you have thousands and thousands of people turning first-time homebuyer age, and you literally physically in St. Louis cannot build a first-time homebuyer house, right? You can't build. Can you build a $250,000 house? Buy the land and build the house in St. Louis for under $300,000?
No.
So what happens when you have increased demand and literally no increase in inventory? What has to happen with prices?
Prices go up.
So that's my argument for all the houses that are in that $100,000 to $250,000 price range that you're looking at. That's why I argue that literally maybe even in 3 years or 5 years, those houses could double in price just because you can't make any more of them.
Yeah. I went into a rabbit hole, I don't know, 6 months ago. Like, has this ever happened? Like, it just seems like we're never going to get out of this phase that we're in, of this low inventory situation. And after the Great Depression, like in the 30s, almost nothing was built. And what happened was, and everybody came back from World War II and wanted to make families and everything like that and buy houses. There was a huge shortage of houses, and the government stepped in and subsidized builders. So I have to imagine that at some point there's going to be better programs for builders to build affordable housing.
There has to be, and I think some of those are on the way, especially in places like California. But in St. Louis, there's no land, right? Because St. Louis is an old city. All the infill has already happened. The only place to build is starting to get out into the country, get out into Wentzville, get out into Festus, go above North City. Like you can build, you can subsidize builders and you can build, but you can't do it in St. Louis. All you can really do are these, rehabbers like yourself and like some of my friends that are taking down houses and putting up new ones. You can do that, but that doesn't really increase inventory because you're replacing one house for
You're
another.
not putting up neighborhoods.
No, yeah, right. And even if you do, all you're doing is replacing an old neighborhood, right? So inventory will not keep up, not in the metro area. People will have to move out of the metro area as the city grows, and the homes in the city will continue to appreciate. And that's my theory. So if you're wondering if you missed the boat on the appreciation, I think that really the boat is temporarily sitting at the dock between. You better jump on it now because it's really going to take off. But that, my 2 cents.
And I don't know how much time we have. I'm more curious. What I've thought that somehow this would even out when, some of the baby boomers, they start turning an age where those houses start turning over. And I want to know your thoughts on that, because a lot, we have an aging demographic too in St. Louis. And at some point, those houses are going to have to turn over.
I've noticed they really hang on to them though. You are right. Eventually, and you see this throughout St. Louis, the number one growing sector in St. Louis seems to be senior housing. Every time I think they're putting up an apartment building, it turns out to be an assisted living facility. Have you noticed how many of those are going up around St. Louis?
Yeah, there are a lot.
So that has to mean that you're right. I mean, that has to mean that people are going to be moving out of those houses and then, moving into these assisted living facilities that are popping up. They have to know something we don't, right? So the problem, that is an opportunity for people like yourself who are adding value to property, but the average, baby boomer that's moving out or greatest generation that's moving out and going into assisted living facility, when you get into their house, it really needs somebody like you or somebody like my buddies Craig Smith or Mike Zuglis, who were on the previous episodes, to come in there and do something before your average first-time homebuyer wants to live in that house, right? Yeah. So I don't know that it's going to really add to inventory at a level that's going to keep up with the demand for that inventory. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And in order for a lot of folks to make money, you can't tear down that house and build a new first-time homebuyer house, right? If you're going to take down that house, you're going to build a 5-bedroom, 4-bath, and you're going to try to sell it for $150,000.
Right.
So it's not creating first-time homebuyer inventory.
Not creating first-time homebuyer inventory.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the struggle. All right, man, I don't want to keep you all day and I don't want to steal everybody's attention here. Thank you, anybody who joined us. I'm going to go ahead and stop the Facebook Live.